Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education Part 7, and this is Session 3. We're going to start off with looking at the passage that we're studying here, which is going to be the second component in that decision-making skill of godly judgment. So here we are, Romans 13:11. And that knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. Let us walk honestly as in the day, not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying. But put ye on the Lord Jesus Christ, and make not provision for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. Now, in a very, very short review, just to get us all thinking about the same things that we left off with last time, I told you that this passage was saying, especially verse 11, that we're going to be asked now for several reasons to invest more time and effort on our sonship education than ever before. First of all, because the education now is about to become more complex, and there is going to be more facets to what we're about to learn than anything up to this time. Secondly, it's going to require more time and effort to get this implemented into our life, for us to take the things that we're about to learn and to start working with them in our life. This is really going to require more than the things that we have had in the past. And lastly, because it's introducing us to a new area that we're going to labor with our Father in. Now, to me, this is a very exciting area. This is something I have great enthusiasm for, and it's something I've really been looking forward to. And so what I'd like to do is take us to verse 11. That's where we left off last time. And I'd like to kind of walk us through this passage. So, Romans chapter 13. Oh, you know what? You just might as well go on through those until you get back to Romans 13:11, Trent. I'm sorry. There you go, right there. Right there. And so let's take a look at this verse. By the way, those verses that you just saw on the PowerPoint, they're in your notes. But you can read the notes about that. What I need to do is get you to this. So, and that knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. And there are some questions that we're going to have answered as we look at this verse. In other words, when he says, and that knowing the time, there's several different ways that you can look at that phrase about knowing the time. Not only that, when he says, now it's high time, well, I'm going to talk to you about that phrase, high time, because there's something we need to understand about that. When he says it's high time to awake out of sleep, what is he really talking about when he says it? Because he's not obviously thinking that as we're reading the passage, we're asleep in our bed. But he's talking about something else there. And then when he says our salvation is nearer than when we believed, then you have to determine what that salvation is. Because if he's talking about salvation from the debt and penalty of sin, that's not nearer, that's further in the past. So this is a different salvation. And the when we believe is important then to identify. But in order to answer these questions, there's a couple of things that I need us to point out and get clear in our mind. And the first one I'm going to start you with is this term, high time. For now it is high time to awake out of sleep. Now, normally the way we use this term, and if you look up high time in a dictionary, but most dictionaries don't give you a phrase, they just give you a word. But if you can find that phrase, you'll see that normally we take high time to mean past time. In other words, it's later than it needs to be. For instance, when a parent has repeatedly told their child to, the room needs to be clean, the room needs to be clean, the room needs to be clean, and then finally, days later, they announce, oh, I cleaned my room, and a parent might say, well, it's high time you got that done, which means really it's past time that got done. And if that were the case, if that was the way Paul was using the term, back me up one frame there, please, Trent. If that's the way he's using this, that now it's high time as a rebuke, well then this first part of the verse would be saying something to correct us or to sort of reprimand us. And then that would tell you how you would take that term, to awake out of sleep. Because if someone was kind of getting on to you about, hey, it's high time to awake out of sleep, and they're kind of reprimanding you, you know what that implies? You're being a little slothful. You're being a little sluggardly. You're laying in bed too long. Well, but this isn't what this part of verse 11 is talking about. This isn't a reprimand at all. And this isn't a rebuke of any kind. We're actually being exhorted to do something that we should be very enthused about. And so when we talk about this issue of it now being high time to awake out of sleep, I want to take you, and this is pretty amazing, in the Oxford English Dictionary, now give me that next slide, it actually had the term high time in there. And here's what it said: the appointed, due, or proper time. So if you understand that, and by the way, back me up one more time, Trent. I want to tell you how we know that, because he didn't just say, and that knowing the time, that it is high time to awake out of sleep, but he said, now it is high time to awake out of sleep. And that word now makes the difference in the way you understand this phrase, because he's saying right now it's high time. If it was past time, he wouldn't be using that kind of phrase. And so, okay, now take me back to the definition, please, Trent. Thanks. So it's the appointed, due, or proper time. Now, in the Oxford English Dictionary, when you get the whole thing, they always give you an example of when the term was used this way, that was in common usage. And you can see, back me up. You can see that in 1586, there was a guy who used this term, and he's actually quoting the first part of Psalm 12:1, and here's what he wrote: Lord, help, it is high time for me to call. Now, you can tell this is back before, they, I don't want to say codified, that's not the right word. It's not standardized, the language, and this is how you spell it and all that. But really, it's not that hard to see that's what he's saying, right? That it's high time for me to call on the Lord is what he's talking about there. Well, that was back in 1586 that was understood. Now, give me that next one, please, Trent. And in 1698, now this is, more than a century later, they used it this way: it is high time now to wind up my bottoms. I couldn't leave this out. I thought you needed to know about this. And I knew this would be strange for you, because most of us only have one bottom, right? And this was in the plural. But it's not really talking about that bottom at all. Does anybody know what that is? I know you're not that old, 1600s. But huh? Oh, that's okay. I don't know if I have that on what's the next slide? Yeah, a bottom is a clue. I had to look that one up too. Is a clue or nucleus on which to wind thread. Or if you just took thread and kind of did it like this and began to wind it on itself, okay, that was called a bottom. Okay, now in our language, when you have a sewing machine and you have thread that's wound up, it's called a what? Really close, isn't it? See, and that word moved from bottom to bobbin, you see. And so you wind thread up on it. Okay, I know this is going to turn to an English language. But huh? Ball, that's close, right? A ball of thread. So a bottom, so he says now it is hot. Back me up one, okay. One more, go forward now. No, there you go, all right. It is high. That Trent's mind reading is just not working today, is it? I don't understand. Okay. It is high. Look at, he uses the word now. It is high time now to wind up my bottoms. You know what he's saying? The proper, appointed, or due time has arrived for me to do something. And I thought this is really good. By the way, you have no idea how hard I had to search to find that. First of all, the is it abridged or unabridged? Which one is the full? Unabridged. The unabridged version of the Oxford English Dictionary is like a set of encyclopedias. It's huge. So you're just not showing the proper pity. Do I have to keep talking to you about this issue? All right. So when he says, it is high time now to wind up my bottoms, I thought, that's exactly the way Paul was using that. That now it is high time to do something. So because Paul uses that word now, and because of the way this word is certainly used, although we don't use it much that way anymore, it means it's not a rebuke. That's the point I'm after. He's not saying, well, it's past time for you to get out of bed. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is, this is the appointed time for you to do something. This is the proper time. This is the due time for you to do something. And I really like those words. In fact, we're gonna see something more about that. And so just to give you an illustration of that, when a mom puts a cake in the oven, teaching her daughter how to bake a cake, she explains if the cake comes out too soon, it's not going to be cooked all the way through. If you leave it in too long, it'll either dry it out or burn it. But there's a high time, and that's a proper use of the term. The mother could go and say, now it is high time to take the cake out of the oven. That's exactly the way that Paul is using this. He's saying, now I want to get that part straight about the high time, because without getting that done in our thinking, we're going to see this in the wrong way. You'd be thinking of someone being scolded. That's high time to get out of bed, you slothful sluggard, you. What are you doing? This changes what we're going to understand awake out of sleep means. And again, this to me, I think this is wonderfully put together. And so the questions we're going to ask ourselves and get the answer to is, what time is Paul referring to? Oh, did I forget that one? I'm sorry. Thanks, Trent. I just skipped it in my head because of the notes. I'm just not really paying attention, and I should. I actually found Romans 13:11 in the Oxford English Dictionary. They use that in there. I worked my fingers to the bone. Okay. Yeah, okay, thank you. That's all I was after. We could have done this 5 minutes ago. All right. Romans 13:11, and here's what it says. Of time or season well advanced, fully come or complete. And you know what Paul is saying? And that knowing the time, that now a time has fully come to do something. Has everybody got that? Okay. All right. Now, I just thought that, I'm glad Trent found that, because I was going to skip right over that. So the questions we're going to ask ourselves is, so what is the time? And that knowing the time, what time is it that we're supposed to know? And what is it we're doing when we awake out of sleep? And in what way is Paul using that word salvation? Well, there's 3 ways to look at the time. Is it on the next slide, Trent? Can you show me? Yeah. All right. In what way is Paul using the word time when he says knowing the time? Here's the first way. You could say it is the time that is available in the rest of your life. Have I got that on the next slide? No, that's just the questions. Go ahead and give me the third one. There you go. The time that's available in the rest of your life. The second way you could take this is the time that you're in this dispensation of grace. And the third way you could take this is the time of where we are in our sonship education. Now, those of you that think it's the third one, you're right. And the reason it's not the first 2, and you know what? I made a note in here to tell myself, I went through this whole thing because when you're first looking at this verse, you don't know the answer to all of that. You have to work through it. And again, you have no idea how hard I worked. But I tell you what, I can give it to you in a nutshell. Oh, yeah, Debbie, yeah, so oh, yeah, Larry, okay, buddy, okay. So Here's the thing. When Paul says, and that knowing the time, would you agree that he means being aware of the time, and that knowing the time? Well, if it's the time of where you are in your lifetime, look, everybody's at a different time, aren't they? So that's not it. Paul's not asking you to be aware of where you are in your lifetime. You say, well, just because he says it that way? No, because you don't know how long you've got, no matter how old you are. You might live to a ripe old age, and yet, you know what? Someone may run over you one day. You don't know that. See, we have no idea about how long that is. So it's not that, because if you said to me, and knowing the time is where you are in the span of your life, I don't know where I am. See, so that's not it. Knowing where you are in the dispensation of grace is not it. Because right now, we wouldn't say we're at the beginning of it, would we? But what if I'm just saying, what if 3,000 years from now, what would they say about where we were in the dispensation of grace? By the way, Paul is going to make a very interesting statement. We're going to see it next time, the next time I come. But you know, Paul in the book of Romans, and we've seen this verse briefly, he talks about what God is doing in this dispensation of grace, and he's talking about the judgment that's going to fall on sinners, whether they be Jew or Gentile. And he asks this question: what if God, willing to show his wrath and make his power known, endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath fitted to destruction? Do you understand? Let me let me leave out the parenthesis and just put in the question. What if God endured with much long suffering the vessels of wrath fitted to destruction? Now, there's something Paul has already been talking about that gives you a context for that, but the part I want to bring to your attention now is that Paul uses that phrase, much long. So I just give it to you in a nutshell. Look, let's just say here's the timeline, here's the bad marker, here's the familiar thing on the timeline that we see of the cross, right? And then we realize that after that, there was that 1 year extension of mercy where Israel had 3 honest opportunities to repent about Jesus of Nazareth being their prophesied Christ. And so when you get to this point right here, because now you have the dispensation of Gentile grace coming on the scene, but it was at this point right here that both Israel and the world were worthy of something. And it had to do with God's wrath. Because when things got to a certain point, God said, I'm going to pour my wrath out. And he was going to do it on Israel and the world. But here's my point. When Paul is explaining the dispensational change, he is talking about what God did when he interrupted that program with Israel and brought in this dispensation of grace. Actually, we're going to look at all of this in verse 12 the next time that we meet. But the point I'm trying to get is, Paul makes a statement early on in Romans, early on in the book of Romans, and he says, what if God endured with much long suffering these vessels of wrath, talking about the people who were manifesting the darkness of this world? You're going to get into that in verse 12, where Paul talks about casting off the works of darkness and putting on the armor of light. He's going to say, what if God endured with much long suffering those vessels of wrath fitted to destruction, which means they were fit to be destroyed? He says, what if he endured with much long... And you know what he's talking about, that long suffering? He's talking about this dispensation of grace. Because instead of bringing in the Lord's day of wrath, what did he do? He postponed that wrath. That's what long suffering is describing. But when Paul says he endured with much long suffering, let me ask you a question. How long had the dispensation of grace been going on by the time Paul writes Romans chapter 3? Yeah. No more than 20 years, maybe less. No more than 20 years. 20 years into the dispensation of grace, Paul is saying he's enduring with much long suffering. There's my point. Now we're not 20 years down the road. We're 2,000 years down the road. How long suffering has he been? My point is, you don't know where you are in this dispensation of grace. Because Paul already thinks this is much long suffering. By the way, it is much long suffering. Because God's looking at a world that deserves something. They've earned it. And he says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to postpone that. Yeah, well, you know what? And here we go. So, much long suffering then. I asked the folks in Monahans, I said, so what would you describe it now? And Linda went, let's see, how did she say that? Because Paul has this phrase that he uses. He uses it in conjunction with, that's it. She said, much more long suffering. And that's pretty right, isn't it? That's good, Tommy. You picked right up on that. So he is being long suffering. But my point is, we don't know where we are in the dispensation of grace. And by the way, Paul's not just writing to this group. He's writing to people who were right back there at the beginning of the dispensation of grace. They don't know where they are in that any more than we know where we are in that. Any more than if it doesn't end in our lifetime, then the folks who follow us will know where they are in that. Do you see what I'm saying? There's only one of these three options that I gave you that no matter when you live in the dispensation of grace and no matter where you are in the span of your lifetime, if you get to Romans 13:11, you're all at the same place in your education as a son. That's the match. And so of those three, when Paul says, and that knowing the time, it's the time of where you have arrived at now in your education as a son. Where have you arrived at? Well, you remember in 12:1 and 2, you had that commitment that you had to make to your Heavenly Father. In chapter, look, let's just do it quickly. From 12:3 to 13:10. You have all of that under your belt. You have those two components of godly wisdom. You have those two components, at least in the initial instruction of it, the two components of godly justice. And now you've gotten one component of godly judgment. And that's where you find yourself. What is it with these markers? And that's where you find yourself. And it's at that point that Paul says to you, and that knowing the time of where you are in this process, that now, at this point, it is high time to do something. You have and no matter when you lived or how old you are, when you get to this place, it doesn't matter. Everybody is getting told this at the exact same time of their education. Do you see? Okay. So when he says, and that knowing the time, that's what you've got to be thinking. Now, I've said it to you, but I need you to hang on to that thought because that has meaning for you later on. Knowing the time of where you have arrived in the education as a son. Now, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep. Now, there's something that we need to talk about, what it means to awake out of sleep. Let me just see here. I think I've gotten way ahead of myself in the notes, so I just want to make sure I'm not leaving something else out. Boy, I passed that. Give me just a second here. You know, you remember last week when we talked about this high time to do something, and I talked to you about that we were moving along, and all of a sudden now we step up to a whole new level of the education that's going to require more time and effort out of us because of the very nature of this education. Remember last time I took you back over and I showed you he was talking about the silver, and then he talked about the hid treasure aspect of that. Do you remember when we talked about that? And that to get the silver in your pocket is one thing, but to find hid treasure takes more time and effort. But you know what, as I got to thinking about this, Paul takes this hid treasure aspect and he actually imports that into his epistles. We haven't run into it quite yet, but we're about to run into it. And I think, if I'm not wrong, that I'm going to give you some verses on this. What's the next verse, Trent? No, that's not it. Okay, so what we're looking at here is, let me just give you some. When Paul talks about we have this treasure in earthen vessels, do you remember that? And then there's another place where he calls it the riches of Christ. And another place he calls it the riches of his glory. He's taken that same treasure concept, except he doesn't always use the word treasure. Now he's going to come along and say there are riches. And what you are about to do now is you're about to bump up. So in the silver education, or as I talked about last time, in the silver plan, okay, what you have is you have from Romans 12:1 to chapter 13 and verse 10. And then after that, you are now, although he hasn't told you this by name yet, you are getting into this, and he is going to give you a name for that. And now, from 13:11 onward, you're going to be in this new level of the education. Now, I've told you a couple of times that it's going to take more time and effort because it's more complex, and I want to give you some details about that so you'll understand a little bit about the complexity of it, or what's going to be involved in that. This step up in our education is going to, in order to get this thing working in our life, we're going to have to do a number of things that we were doing them before, but this is going to add one more thing that we're doing it about. That didn't come out right. This is kind of ahead of the thing, but in Romans chapter 13, verses 11 through 14, and even on through godly equity in the next part, in this part, you're going to be introduced to an aspect of your Father's business that you have never participated in before. And you couldn't. And the reason you couldn't is because before you could be told about this particular aspect of something your Father is doing in this world. Listen, this is important, and I don't know, I should have spent more time in the past talking to you about this, but we talk about the operation of God. The operation of God is that thing that God wants to have accomplished that is part of His business. That's what makes the difference between godly living and godly labor. For instance, you already know there's a thinking that goes on, and that thinking in turn is supposed to produce a godly living. But you understand that in the everyday living out of that new thinking, that is not necessarily godly labor. That's just godly living. But when you take those two, when you begin to take that new way of thinking and that new way of living, and then you direct that into a particular operation that God wants accomplished, that then becomes the godly labor. Do you see? So laboring is not just, I'm living for Jesus every day. I mean, that may be godly living, but godly labor is, there is something specific that my Father wants to get accomplished in this world that is part of His business. And when I take that godly thinking and that godly living and move all of that now, conduct and behavior, into accomplishing that operation, that is what becomes godly labor. Does that make sense to everybody? And so not everything's a labor, and I know that was a little confusing when we used to talk about that because the godly living, the godly labor looked pretty much the same. But what I'm trying to get you to see is that this labor is more specific. It's pointed towards something that is in direct connection with our Father's business, something He wants to do. Now let me make the first statement that I made to you. The reason this is going to take more time and effort is because now you're going to be taught to engage in an aspect of your Father's business that up to this time you have never been able to engage in before. You're going to have to learn a whole new thinking and a whole new conduct and behavior. But once you get those down, then you're going to be able to participate, you're going to be able to labor in a particular operation that is very exciting. And it's something that will really capture your attention. But it's something that until we had this background right here, we didn't have enough foundation for us to be told about this new aspect of His business. That's why now it is high time to do something. Because prior to getting all of this done in us, you couldn't do this. It would be like saying it's high time to start working algebra. But before you ever work algebra, don't you need to know your numbers and then learn how to add and all that kind of bit? There's foundational things that need to be done. But when you move from addition and subtraction and multiplication and division and you move into algebra, wouldn't you say this is a new level of math? Yes, it is. And now that's what's happening here. You've been working along here, and now all of a sudden He says, and now that you've got this much in you, now it's high time for you to do something. By the way, I'll give you that later. I'm really wanting to talk about things that I know you would want to hear, but I need to try to stick with the notes. So this godly labor that we're going to engage in is something you're going to increasingly participate in for the rest of your sonship life unless you quit. If you quit, you won't have to worry about it. But if you don't quit, this thing that you're about to learn is, as time goes by, you're going to be involved in that more and more and more. And when I tell you what it is, you'll understand exactly why it works that way. Now, back to Romans 13:11. For now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. Now we have to talk about what is that salvation? I'm sorry? Well, I'm going to come back to that. Okay, Linda wants to know what is awake out of sleep. And no, okay, yeah, you're right. Yeah, we're going to come back to that. But I just want to do a general deal about this, and we'll come back and pin both of these down. No. There you go. For now is our salvation nearer when we believed. Here's the thing I want to tell you. In a very general sense, no matter how you define salvation. Okay, work with me here. We've already talked about salvation can be from the debt and penalty of sin. And I told you that's not what this one is. Because your salvation from the debt and penalty of sin isn't nearer today than when you believed. You were justified unto eternal life back the day you trusted Christ as your all-sufficient Savior. That's in the past. So that's not drawing nearer. But there is something else that you can be saved from. Somebody give me one of those things. There's several things here. Okay. Okay. From the policy of evil. What else?
Since he's using the word salvation, and then he uses the word believe, which in a way are interchangeable, then I'm thinking he's talking about now as our salvation, which we have already nearer than when we believe was in the past, but the fulfillment of that when we get
Very good. Very good. I want to give you that one last, because the fourth one I thought you come up with is, even though we're not delivered from it, we are saved from the effects of the sufferings of this present time. Remember, the doctrine produces a comfort and long-suffering and that. So that's the same way we're saved from the policy of evil. We're not saved from it, you understand, from the sense that God's not going to let it happen, but saved from the effects of the attacks of the policy of evil. There you go. Yeah, they'd be bear it. Right. Okay. Now, this one that Tommy's at, now this is the one that I really believe this is. I just put it in this nutshell, that salvation is talking about the completion of our salvation. Now, this life is going to be over in one of two ways. What are those two ways? Right. Either we're going to get raptured out or you're going to die. Either way, and it doesn't matter. By the way, since this one is not it doesn't matter which of these others you think it is. The general statement of now is our salvation nearer than when we believed, that statement is true no matter which one of these you want to say it is. Because if you're saying we're going to be saved from the day of the Lord's wrath, would you agree that with every day that passes, that you're being saved from the day of wrath is nearer than when you believed? Absolutely. But it's just as true as, from any of the other things there. And this is the one that I'm really looking at. This is when it's all wrapped up for us, because what I believe verse 11 is saying to us is, and I'm going to give it to you long and then condense it down to something short. You only have a limited opportunity that is diminishing every day to get, knowing where you are in the education, you have a limited opportunity that is diminishing every day to get yourself educated as a son. That is the general overview of what the end part of verse 11 is talking about. And the reason it's talking about it that way is because verse 11 is giving you a motivation for awaking out of sleep. There is something about what that is talking about that makes you realize, now that I have arrived at this point in the education, the appointed time, the proper time, the fully come time is now here for me to do something. And we'll talk about that awake out of sleep. And the reason that it's the appropriate time for me to start thinking about this. Now think about this in the context of what I've told you so far. You're going to have to invest more time and effort. Right? All right. When one of our church members had a knee replacement surgery and we went up to Temple, Texas, and to be there for the surgery. And I said, what time have you got to go in the morning? Because we're going to get up and see you in the morning before you have it. And she said, I got to be there. They said, I got to be there at 6:30. They want me there a few minutes early. So I said, so what time are you leaving the hotel? She said, 6. 6 in the morning. Proof this is not godly. Just proof right there. All right. Yeah, okay. There's a few of you that understand. Okay. So 6. So I'm thinking if they're going to leave the hotel, she and her husband are going to leave the hotel at 6, and we were staying in the same hotel. I thought we got to get up 5:57, 5:58. Because the good thing about having this hairdo is you just wash rag it and you're done, And I'm thinking, I sleep in my clothes. How long does it take to put on shoes, right? All right, in all seriousness. So I'm thinking, you know what, we got to get up. So we do. We get up about 10 after 5 because we're not coming back to the hotel. We got to load the car before we go. So you got all of that going, right? So I'm getting all this together. So we leave a call at the front desk for them to call us and wake us up. Listen, when it's high time to get up. But in order to get this done, it required me to get up at a time I would not have ordinarily gotten up. I'm just trying to set your thinking up for what we're about to encounter now is going to require us to do something we were not doing before. And that term, awake out of sleep, by the way, sleep, I know in the Bible, There are plenty of times when the Bible talks about the sluggard and sleeping, a little folding of the hands to sleep. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? But you do realize that God made it so that your body has to sleep in order to get things done, right? But sometimes something happens that you go, look, if you're going to, let me do it this way. I'll just cut myself off. If you're going to have to find more time to get your sonship done, there's only 3 ways to do it. One of them is to get up early. What's the second one? Stay up late. That's the one I like. I can stay up forever, but once I go to bed, it's more like resurrection, not waking up. What's the third alternative if you're going to find time? That's right. You're going to have to make a decision about what you're doing that this is now going to kind of go away because it's going to get replaced with something that to you has more value. And that's why now you are being introduced. You're given the initial instruction in making wise sonship decisions about how you spend your time. And that awake out of sleep, that's what that's talking about. It's not really a rebuke, as I showed you about, and now it is high time. Knowing the time of where you are in the education, you have now arrived at the proper time, at the appointed time to awake out of sleep. In other words, you know what? You're going to have to set that alarm a little earlier. He's not talking about you physically getting up earlier here. When he's writing this, you understand, high time to awake out of sleep. He's not saying, I think you're all in bed as sleeping as you read this. That's not what he's saying. That is an all-encompassing phrase that's actually talking about you now having to make an effort to do something that you might not have done before. You are. You're going to have to set aside a time. You're going to have to find the time. Now, I can't tell you how much more time and effort this is going to mean for you because people are different. There is no, if it was going to be the same, God would have just written it in the Bible. But I can tell you now that it will take more time to implement what we're about to learn than before. And not only that, this is something that if you want to talk about, and I'm really excited to talk about this actually stems out of a conversation that I had with Rick after the study the last time I was here. But this is actually now going to point us toward looking back as you get ready to bump up to this new level of the education. It's high time to awake out of sleep. You know what? Now, this is going to require something of you. That's what that's talking about. And awaking out of sleep, folks, is doing whatever it takes to get this done in you. And if it means 20 extra minutes, then it's 20 extra minutes. If it's an extra hour, then it's an extra hour. If it's something different, then it's something different. But whatever it takes to get this done, this is what this verse is talking about. And the reason it's saying it that way, and that knowing the time, that now it's high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believe. He's saying, look, you've arrived at a place where now you're going to need to invest more time and effort, awake out of sleep. And the reason you're going to do that is because this opportunity that you have to get this done is diminishing every single day. Now, I know I'm saying that to you now. But I'm going to tell you, I was working through this stuff, and I'm sitting at my desk, and suddenly this doctrine gripped me. And the last part of verse 11, it was more than just I kind of understand what it's saying. All of a sudden, I realize it's not just that time is running out. It is slowly moving toward the end for every one of us. How much longer do we have? I don't know. But that's not the issue of how much longer do you have. The issue is Yeah, I mean, the issue really is going to be, you have all of this sitting back here, right? Let me just mention it here. I know this is not the right place in the notes, but it's the right place in our discussion. You have all this sitting back here, and I already know. What have I got left here? 4 minutes? This is not good. I already know that we have things sitting back there that we've already been educated about that we're not comfortable with yet. And we can't let any of that go in order to take on this new part of our sonship education. Let me give you an example. I'll just give you one. I'm going to talk about the thing that Rick and I talked about in the next session. That's where it really belongs anyway. You remember back in Romans 12, verses 3 through 8, where it talked about you were part of a body? And we talked about those body attributes. And a thing as simple, if I'm going to throw Trey this marker, a thing as simple as that, my whole body works in concert to do that. This foot comes forward, my weight shifts, my head tilts, my arm comes back, my fingers let go at a certain place, and I don't even have to think about it. It's an automatic thing that my body does that I just pitch that marker out there, but my eyes are looking in a certain way. I don't have to tell my body to go do that. I have a question for you. Does this body function like that? The answer is no, it doesn't. Now, I know we've only gotten in, I'm not making us feel guilty about it. What I'm trying to say is our work to get to that one little piece is not nearly accomplished yet. And that's not the only one. We could go back and look at every one of them and go, wow, we're just kind of getting our, just kind of hearing about it. And no, we're not doing all of those things yet. But that's the goal, because when the body of Christ gets in the creature, that body is going to need to work together as seamlessly as it can so that it naturally does the things that it's supposed to do. Everything from delivering the creature from the bondage of corruption to carrying out the will of our Father in the ages to come. Every bit of that is going to be dependent upon that body being able to work together to do that. And I got to tell you that if most churches are the microcosm for the body of Christ in the creature, when we get up there, it'll be a miracle if anything happens to the creature. So I'm just saying, we have a lot already on our plate. And I've only mentioned one thing to you. But we have all of this, and you can't afford to leave that behind because you see this one and you go, wow, I really like this, because once I tell you what it is and you go, wow, that's very exciting, but you can't do this. You have to kind of put yourself in the position of somebody who's working a job and you've got all these responsibilities and you've been working and getting your job done, and one day the boss comes in and goes, hey, I got a new task that you're going to start taking over now. And the first thing you might think is, hold it, everything I already have is kind of a full-time job. Where am I going to find the time to get this done? And that's essentially what your Father is doing to you, is that you've been given these things and you're already working on them. And now He goes, okay, I'm really glad you've been working on that, because now it's high time that you got the next one. And guess what? You're not through with it yet. We've still got equity sitting in front of us. And I'm sitting at my desk, and suddenly this thought becomes really clear to me, so much so that I just stood up and walked out and sat down on the front porch of my office to pray and think about this thing, because and you know what I came to the conclusion of? Now look, this is serious stuff to me. It is. I love what we're doing, and I want to do it. I mean, I don't want to do anything else. But I was thinking about all these things I've kind of been working on, and I wasn't really looking off in the future to realize it's like my Father's coming in and He's going, here's a whole new task. I need you to get busy on this one. Because that kind of made me think, what have you been doing Because I realize the more of this foundation I have down, the easier this new aspect of his business is going to be. And I'm kind of kicking myself because I'm thinking, what were you thinking? Did you think you were going to coast along forever on this? Did you not realize this was going somewhere? You know you're not through all the skills yet. What did you think? He was going to come along and say, if you find the time, if it's not too much trouble, and when it's convenient, you might want to look at this if you want to. Instead, I look back, and look, I'm not lazy about it, but I look back and I think, I should have been working harder at this. I should have had more of this down. What did I think this was leading to? I was kind of doing this on the front porch. What were you thinking? Of course it was going here. And then this thought occurred, and equity's still sitting out in front of me. And you know what? Of all four, it's the biggest. It runs from 14.1 to 15.7. It's the biggest. So now I'm saying to myself, okay, smart guy, what do you think you're going to be thinking when equity comes along? And you know what I realize? Look, I look at this aspect of his business, I look at this, and you know what I think about it? That could be a full-time job. That could be a full-time job. But you know what? I've still got these. So I can't let them go. And now I'm going to add this new thing to it. That's one reason why it's going to take more time and effort, because whatever time and effort went into that, if you're thinking, well, I know where I'm going to find the time, I'm just going to quit working on that and I'm going to work on that. That's not going to fly. You're going to have to, and I promise you, you're going to be praying more about this than you think you will. This is something that you're really going to be, and by the way, it's just like adding things. Remember in the old days we had a prayer list, and 99 out of 100 of them didn't need to be on there. But we had the prayer list, and you know what? The more things you added to the prayer list, guess what? The longer it took you to go through the list. Well, it's the same thing that you're talking to your Father about now. When you add this, guess what? This is one more big, and this is a very big deal to Him. So you're going to have to come to the place where you're going to go, look, you know what? I got more to talk about. I got more to implement. I've got more to understand. I've got more to put into practice. And then when I finally get these going, I've got a whole operation of God that I'm supposed to labor with Him in here. And by the way, when you know what this is, you'll be very enthusiastic about it. I don't believe there'll be anybody in the place that will go, oh, brother, please, one more thing. I don't think we'll be looking at it like that. But the danger is, oh, I'm so excited about this one, I'm just going to kind of put these in the background. You can't put those in the background because these actually compose a foundation upon which you get this going. Okay, now I've talked over, so we're going to stop here, but we're going to pick this up when we come back, because now that I've given you this general overview, does everybody kind of understand what verse 11 is saying to you now? And because of knowing the time, because you're aware of where you are in the education, you have now come to the place where you're going to have to, that it is high time, it's the proper appointed time for you to now make some very wise sonship decisions about how you spend your time. And you're not going to be doing it by sleeping. You're going to have to awake out of sleep. In other words, you're going to have to do whatever it takes to get this new thing done. And the thing that has to be in the back of your mind about this is the clock. And I have several ways that I understand it, but you could just say the last part of verse 11 is put together like this: don't waste time. The one that works for me is, because I say this to myself all the time, the clock is ticking. We used to say in the old days, when I was working at a church in Louisiana, Sunday is like a freight train. You can lay down on the tracks and take a nap on Monday, and you feel like you're okay. But if you lay on those tracks long enough, that train will run over you. Sunday is coming every week, and you have to be ready for Sunday. And if you're not, that won't stop the train. Now, I'm not trying to be morose about how I describe Sunday, but you understand, every week, as soon as Sunday was over, your mind turned to the next Sunday. You just had to stay focused. So for me, the thing that has always been in me is, I say this to myself all the time, the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. It's not stopped just because, you are. So those are things that work for me, but there it is right there. For now is our salvation nearer when we believe. Now here's the last thing. I promise this will be the last thing I'll say in this. This is the single word that I think needs to be there for us, that there is an urgency to what we're doing, because the opportunity is diminishing every day. You have less opportunity. How much longer do we have? You know what? It'd be wonderful if we had another 25 years. For most of us, we will. For some of us, we won't. And I can't call who that will be or won't be. But I know this. Because of what we're about to face, there is going to be a real urgency now to what we're doing. And not panic, but understanding it is more important than ever now for me to make wise use of my time. Because there are plenty of things in my life that don't edify me. And if I was going to take you to the verses that are in your notes, Paul says, all things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful, but all things edify not. You're going to have to decide what's important. And that's how we're going to spend our time. Okay, we'll take a break, and then we'll come back. Great. Okay, this will be great.